Hey guys, my name's Matt and welcome to the Game Gengo Genki series. In this episode, we're going to be checking out the te form of verbs, a very useful piece of grammar. We'll be learning how to conjugate the te form, as well as several different uses of the te form, like how we can make a polite request with te kudasai, connecting and describing two actions together using the te form, like a comma, using te with TEMO I to give permission and to ask permission, using te with te wa IKEMASEN to say you must not or can't do something. And we'll also be taking a look at some other pieces of language, like how you can use kara to explain a reason to something, as well as some further uses of how to use MASHOU to offer assistance. In this video, we're going to be having a look at all of those pieces of grammar with a bunch of example sentences from video games in order to help you give context to exactly how these pieces of language are used. This video is brought to you by all of the wonderful supporters on Patreon. So if you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and come join us in the Game Gengo Discord community. So without further ado, let's get started. So in order to use the te form, before we get started looking at all the different ways you can use it, you first have to know how to make it. So let's just take a quick look at how to actually conjugate the te form. Like for example, in many textbooks like the Genki Textbook, they teach you things like the ru verbs and the u verbs. Now, as I explained in one of the previous episodes, I actually advise against learning that way and instead learn the godan and ichidan verbs. This is the way that people in Japan actually categorize the verbs, and I find this much more useful and much more simple. So very simply, godan just means 5 stages, ichidan 1 stage. And what that means is every verb is one of these two. It's either an ichidan, very simple, you just have 1 stage to conjugate it. Generally, you just drop the ru and add whatever conjugation you want to add. Godan verbs are a little bit more complicated and you need to learn the rules based on how that verb ends. If you'd like a quick review of what godan and ichidan verbs are, check this video right here. That'll give you a really good feel for how to use godan and ichidan verbs. But as I said, very simply, 5 stages, 1 stage. So for the te form, this is very simple for ichidan verbs, also known as ru verbs in the textbooks that you might learn at a school or something. The problem with that classification is not all verbs that end in ru are actually ru verbs. It gets complicated, that's why godan and ichidan is a much better system. So for the absolutely simplest conjugation, we have ichidan verbs, like for example, miru, to see. Well, all you have to do for an ichidan verb, 1 stage, is just drop the ru and replace it with te. That's it. And now you've created the conjugation for the te form. Miru, to look.
その妙な箱で他人の心を覗き見る。
Mite, to look in the te form.
これを見て。
Taberu, to eat.
十郎、夕ご飯食べるでしょ。
This turns into tabete.
昨日から何も食べてないんでしょ。
Drop the ru, add te. So that's simple enough. Ichidan verbs or ru verbs are very simple. Drop the ru, add te. This turns it into the te form. For godan verbs, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's actually not too difficult once you get your head around it. It's all based on how the verb ends, the sound that it ends in. For any godan verb that ends in an u, tsu, or ru, simply replace the u, tsu, or ru with a small tsu and then the te form. So instead of just te by itself, you have this small tsu added before it. This just kind of has a bit of a gap when you say it. This small tsu is like a gap in speech. So like for example, ao, to meet.
私たちは必ずまた会う。
So this is a, u. It ends in an u sound and it's a godan verb. So all you have to do to turn it into the te form is add the small tsu before the te. Ao, atte.
よ、聞こえるか悟空。あの世で死んだ神様に会ってさ。
So see how it's not ate, right? Ate. It's atte. It has a small gap in between the two sounds. That's what that small tsu is doing. So ao, to meet, turns into atte. Tsu, so like matsu, to wait.
悟空さ、ちょっと待つだ。
待つのか、フリーザ。
Turns into matte. Not mate, matte. Remember to have that gap.
やっと来たようだな、孫悟空。待っていたぞ。
Or for example, a godan verb that ends in a ru, like kaeru, to go home, or to return.
それができたらザナルカンドへ帰ることができるかもしれない。
So again, u, tsu, and ru verbs just add the small tsu, then the te. Kaeru to return turns into kaete.
ある日、海へトレーニングに行ったまま、帰ってこなかった。
But be careful with ru verbs because sometimes there are ru verbs on either side. But just a general rule of thumb, all ichidan verbs end in a ru, but not all verbs that end in a ru are ichidan. That's the general golden rule of thumb. And that's why the whole classification of ru verbs is very, very confusing, and I would just ignore that and focus on ichidan and godan instead. The next three sounds we have are nu, bu, and mu. You can see they kind of sound similar, right? Nu, bu, and mu. Now to turn this into the te form, all you have to do is just replace this nu with nde, like shinu, to die,
To be 9S 死ぬなよ
this turns into shinde, the te form of to die.
死んでもらおうか
Yobu, to call,
大丈夫か？今救急車を呼ぶ。
this turns into yonde.
ちょっと大丈夫っすか？
動かない方がいいって。今救急車呼んでるから。
And finally, yasumu, to rest,
休む暇はないか。
this turns into yasunde.
ゆっくり休んでくれ。
So as you can see, it's pretty simple. Absolutely any verb that ends in a nu, bu, or mu sound, simply just replace it with the nde. Shinu, to die, shinde. Yobu, to call, yonde. Yasumu, to rest, yasunde. The next ending of verbs is any verb that ends in a su, like for example, hanasu, to talk.
フレデリカ様、今はローゼル族の問題を話す時ではありません。
Well, the conjugation rules for su are very, very simple. Any su just turn into shite. Hanasu, hanashite.
いや話してくれてありがとう
セレナは皆と会う前に話しておきたいことが。
The next verb ending we have is ku, like for example, kiku, to hear.
彼らに会ってどうするつもり？
俺はあまりに何も知らない。奴らに全てを聞く。
When a verb ends in a ku sound, in order to turn it into the tef form, you need to replace the ku with ite. So an i and then the tef form. So kiku, to listen, to hear, would be kite.
あんたの口から聞いておきたい。イタチの全てを。
And now we have the voiced version of ku, gu. So you could probably already guess how this is going to conjugate based on what we said previously. Ku, like kiku, turns into kite. Gu, like oyogu, to swim.
まったく途中で詐称しないでよね。私泳ぐの苦手だから。
That turns into oyoide.
ここ水の中。すごい。魚まで泳いでる。
So again, we have this de form with these voiced sounds. Gu. There's that vibration in your voice. Gu. But ku, there is no vibration, so it's not voiced. So for any verb that ends in a ku sound, just replace the ku with ite. Kiku, to hear, kite, to listen. Gu ending verbs like oyogu, to swim, replace the gu with ide, oyoide. Oyogu turning into oyoide. And that's pretty much it. There are only 3 exceptions to these rules that you need to be aware of. Just 3, so it's not too complicated. For the verb iku, to go, suru, to do, and kuru, to come, they have their own conjugation rules. That's it. These 3, just be careful of, they don't follow the rules that we saw just previously. So iku, to go.
俺新大陸に行くんだ
To turn iku into the tef form, all you need to do is replace the ku with small tsu and then te. Kind of like how we did with the u, tsu, and ru ending verbs. The same thing. Iku turns into ite.
俺お腹痛いからトイレ行ってくんね。
For suru, this is a little bit different. This is actually the same conjugation rules as any verb that ends in a su sound. So suru turns into shite. So suru, to do,
今からバーチャスミッションを開始する。
If you want to turn it into the TEF form, replace all of suru into shite. This is a little bit different. Suru, shite.
スネーク、ヘビね。私はエヴァ。誘惑してみる？
And then finally we have kuru, to come.
最近変なメールが来るの。
And this is just like suru, where you have to replace the whole verb when you conjugate it into the te form. Kuru turns into kite. So this is just kite. No small tsu added, just kite. Not kite. No, kite.
静かにしてください。
は？
会社の先輩来てんだよ。
And so congratulations, that is how you conjugate all of the verbs into the TEF form. It may sound a little bit complicated right now, but trust me, you definitely get a natural feel for this over time. And to be honest, you won't even pay attention to whether something's a godan or an ichidan or ru or u if you choose to study in that way. Eventually, you won't even think about that at all. You'll just think, oh, this verb conjugates into this way. It's really just beginners who have to kind of learn all of these rules, because this is when you're being exposed to the most amount of language. Later on, you'll eventually just get used to it and you'll just be like, oh, of course, I know the verb conjugates like that. So don't be too scared if this is kind of overwhelming. So let's just have a quick recap. Any ichidan verb or ru verbs, super simple, just drop ru and replace it with the te. That's how you turn it into the te form. For u, tsu, and ru ending godan verbs, for these verbs, you need to replace that sound with a small tsu and then a te. So it's like a gap. Matsu, matte. Ao, atte. Kaeru, kaette. With any of the verbs like nu, bu, and mu, replace it with nde. Shinu, shinde. Yobu, yonde. Yasumu, yasunde. For any verb ending in a su, just replace it with shite. Hanasu, hanashite. For any verb ending in a ku sound, except for iku, like kiku, to hear, just replace the ku with ite. Kiku, kite. With any verb that ends in a gu, replace the gu with ide. Remember, it's kind of a voiced sound. So, oyogu, oyoide. And then finally, iku, suru, and kuru are kind of irregular. For iku, replace the ku with small tsu and then te. Iku, ite. And then suru and kuru are completely irregular. You have to replace the whole verb with the te form. Suru replace with shite and kuru replace with kite. So a huge otsukare-sama, everybody. That was a lot of information. Okay, now you know how to create the te form. So now let's actually have a look at how to use the te form. Why do you need to turn a verb into the te form? So in this lesson, we're going to be having a look at 4 main different ways of using the te form. How you can use the te form to make a request, how you can connect 2 actions together, kind of like what a comma does in a sentence, giving and asking for permission, as well as stating that something is forbidden. So let's look at the first use here, making a polite request. This is super simple. Let's say you want to request someone do an action. All you have to do is get a verb and put it in the te form followed by KUDASAI. If you do this, you're now requesting that they do that action. So like with our first set of sounds, u, tsu, and ru, if you were to say, please wait, you could say, matte kudasai.
ちょっと待ってくださいね。
Or like the second sound, the nu, bu, and mu sounds, you could say, shinde kudasai, please die.
ここで全員死んでください。
So it's pretty simple, just turn a verb into the te form followed with kudasai to request someone do that action.
誰かヨナを助けてください。誰か！
So like here in Nier Replicant, we have the main character Nier screaming for someone to help his sister, Yona. So the verb here to help or to save is taskeru, and he says tasukete kudasai. So as we can see, this is an ichidan verb. You just replace the ru with te. That's it. Taskeru, tasukete.
もう、そのことは忘れてください。
Or like here, Emiru is asking please forget that. So wasureru to forget, wasurete kudasai. Just replace the ru with te. And then follow with kudasai to make a request. Please die. Please wait. please forget. The next use of the te form is incredibly common and absolutely essential to everybody's Japanese. The te form can be used to connect two actions together. Like for example, you did this action and then you did this action. It kind of shows a sequence between these two events. This and then this. In Japanese, you can't use the to particle after a verb to say this and this. That's used for nouns, like for example, dogs and cats. Inu to neko. But you can't do that here with verbs. You need to put them into the te form. So let's say for example, you have two actions in a sentence. Go to the library and study. In English, we would have the and in between these two actions. Go to and study. But in Japanese, you have to use the te form. So you could say, for example, Toshokan ni ite, go to the library, and then follow it with the second action, Nihongo o benkyou shimasu, to study Japanese. So you need to put the first verb in the te form in order to connect it with the second action. If you look at the kind of sequential order of these events, the first thing you need to do is go to the library. So that's the one that you say first. That's the one you put in the te form. And then the second action, studying, you do this after you've gone to the library, right? So, ite benkyou suru. Go and then study.
アクセスユニットは汚染されています。格納庫に行って飛行ユニットを奪いましょう。
So like here in Nier Automata, go to the hangar and steal a flying unit. So we can see the first action is to go to the hangar. You need to go to the hangar first, right? That's why it's in the te form. So here, hangar ni ite, go to the hangar, and then followed by the final action to steal a flying unit. So we're connecting these two actions.
レジスタンスに接触して彼女を見つけ出してくれ。これが最後のチャンスだ。
Or like here in Metal Gear Solid 4, to get into contact with the resistance and then find her. So the first action is to get into contact. So we put that into the te form, seishoku shite. And then the second action, find her. So as you can see, the te form can be used to combine two actions with each other. First you go to the library, then you study. First you go to the hangar, then you steal the flying aircraft. First you get in contact with the resistance, then you find her. The next useful use of the te form is actually to ask for permission or to give permission. So all you have to do to ask permission to do something or to give permission for something, just follow a verb in the te form with mo ii desu. So taberu to eat. Is it okay to eat? Tabete mo ii desu ka?
それまんじゅうか。食べていい。
Yes, it's okay to eat. Tabete mo ii desu. Or just tabete mo ii. May I go to the bathroom? Toire ni itte mo ii desu ka?
すみません、トイレに行ってもいいですか?
Yes, you can go to the toilet. Hai, itte mo ii. Or you could just say, hai, ii desu. Yes, it's okay. So let's say you want to ask permission to ask something. Is it okay to ask? Kiku, to ask. Kiite, the te form. Kiite mo ii. Is it okay? Or kiite mo ii desu ka? Is it okay to ask?
ちょっと聞いてもいいですか?
Or maybe you want to ask, is it okay to come somewhere? So kuru, to come, kite, in the te form, kite mo ii. Is it okay to come?
たまにお仕事見学に来てもいいですか?
Or like here, is it okay to borrow a ship?
その船お借りしてもいいですか?
So the shitemo ii desu ka is the formal way of asking. You can drop the deska and just make it a casual sentence, shitemo ii, and you can even make it even more casual by dropping the mo in this. So you could just say shite ii instead of shitemo ii.
サインお願いしていいですか?
もちろん。
もう言っていいか?
But this is very casual kind of language, but you'll definitely see this in media and video games, anime, TV shows, people talking all the time. Definitely very useful, but in a textbook, you might not necessarily learn this. But you can drop the mo in temo ii. The next piece of grammar we have in this lesson is to say that you must not do something. Now, this is quite a strong piece of language. It's a very strong way of prohibiting something. It's almost like you're in a place of authority. So to very strongly prohibit something, you can use the te form with wa IKEMASEN. Te wa IKEMASEN. You must not do. Something you'll often see in Japan, maybe you might go to a temple and you're not allowed to take photos. Well, maybe the guard might say to you, Shashin o totte wa ikemasen. You must not take photos here. But it's very, very strong, kind of like a must not.
絶対に孫悟飯さんを死なせてはいけません。
So like seen here in Dragon Ball very strongly, we must not let Gohan die. So shinaseru to let die, shinasete wa ikemasen. We must not let him die.
触ってはいけません。二人は石にされてしまったのです。
Sawaru to touch, sawatte wa ikemasen. You must not touch.
言えない。
喋ってはいけない。私のことを誰にも喋ってはいけない。
Shaberu to talk, shabette wa ikenai. You must not talk. Now, this is a very formal way of speaking, and people don't always prohibit something in a formal setting. You can actually use this in a more casual way of speaking. Instead of the tewa, you can actually contract that, kind of put it together in a kind of slang way. The tewa turns into cha. So tewa, cha. This makes it a little bit more casual in the way you're talking. The sounds are bleeding together. So you could say, instead of you must not forget, wasurete wa ikemasen. That's a very, very formal way of talking. You could say in a more casual way, wasurecha ikenai.
忘れないよ。忘れちゃいけないんだ。
So masen is polite negative, so just turn it into the normal negative, nai, the casual negative, and then we're bleeding the sounds together, te wa ikenai, cha ikenai. So wasurecha ikenai, you must not forget. And there's also another variation you might sometimes see. Instead of ikemasen or ikenai, sometimes you just see dame. It's no good. They actually mean the same thing. Ikenai and dame, it's no good, literally. So you can actually use them interchangeably. You could say cha dame, it's no good to do something. One thing about when these sounds bleed together is if the verb in the te form is just a te, then it turns into a cha when it's bleeding together. Tewa, cha. But if the sound is a voiced sound, like we've learnt de, shinde, well, instead of it being a cha, it's now a ja. So it's making the cha voiced, ja. So like here, you could even have shinja dame. You must not die.
死んじゃダメだ、カイネ。
So there are some more casual ways you can use this language that you'll definitely see, but the more formal way that we're seeing in the textbook is te wa ikemasen. But just know that it can be actually made a bit more casual, like te wa ikenai, cha ikenai, ja ikenai, cha dame, or ja dame. Okay, so now we're finished with how to use the te form in lesson 6 of the Genki textbook. Very useful piece of language, so I hope you guys found that quite interesting. There's definitely a lot of tricky things about it that will take some time to get used to, but don't worry too much, you'll definitely get there. There are 2 more pieces of language that we're going to be learning in lesson 6 of the Genki textbook today, and the first piece is kara, to express a reason for something. Kind of like because. So kara can be used after an explanation to kind of explain why the situation is the way it is. It can both come in between an explanation and the situation, or it can come at the end. You could have the situation and then the reasoning after that. And so kara can be a little bit tricky because in the textbook it says that it's just situation, explanation, because. Kara. But that's not how it's always used. Sometimes you'll actually have explanation kara and then explain the situation.
違います。これは私の意思です。必ず戻りますから、あと少し自由にさせてください。
Like for example here in Tales of Vesperia, I will definitely come back, so 必ず戻りますから. So that's the explanation, but we don't know the situation yet. It comes after. あと少し自由にさせてください. Please let me be free for a little bit. So that's the situation. You could flip this sentence to fit the way the textbooks taught you. You could say あと少し自由にさせてください. 必ず戻りますから. So the exact same sentence, it's just a different way of ordering it. Instead of I will definitely return, so give me some freedom, you could say, please give me some freedom because I'll definitely return. So sometimes this kara can be translated as because or so or even since.
俺はまだ仕事がありますからそろそろ。また新しい依頼いただけるんならいつでも。
Since I still have work to do, I gotta go soon. I gotta head off. And sometimes it can even come at the end of a very long interaction in language. It's not necessarily explaining the same thing the speaker said, like we can see here in Lost Judgment.
この件は理事長と僕らしか知らない。ですよね。
ええ。知っている人間が多いほど秘密は漏れるものですから。
Here he's saying that they kept the matter a secret so that only this small group of people knew. And then a different person explains, yes, that's because the more people there are, the easier it is for secrets to leak. So you can see that kara doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the whole sentence that's just from the speaker. Person A, we've kept it a secret. Person B, yes, because the more people know about it, the easier it is to leak. Kara can be seen as kind of like because, so, or since. It's explaining the reason for something. And the final piece of language we have in this lesson is MASHOU. Now, this is actually an extension of something we've previously learnt, MASHOU.
行きましょう。
If you remember from the previous lesson, MASHOU is used when you're kind of expressing some level of volition to do an action, will to do an action, kind of like a let's in Japanese. And that's why you'll often see it translated this way. Let's go. Ikimashou.
ゆきちゃん、次は必ずデートしようね。
Or like seen here in 13 Sentinels, let's go on a date. Deito shio. So this just expresses volition, will to do an action. However, this new piece of language, mashou ka or shio ka, it's just the volitional form with ka at the end. So mashou or yo with ka, this is now saying kind of like a shall I or shall we.
いいね。どこに行こうか。
This expresses kind of like a suggestion to do an action. Shall we get something to eat?
屋台で何か食べましょうか。
So, 食べましょうか. So if you said 食べましょう, that's very much let's eat.
まあまあ、さあ、早く食べましょう。
But if you say 食べましょうか, it's kind of like a suggestion. Shall we eat? Shall we return?
そろそろ戻りましょうか。
And even, shall we go? 行こうか.
さあ、行こうか。
So the difference here, for example, is iko is very much saying let's go. It's expressing the will to do something. But because we have the ka question particle at the end, it's still expressing the will to do something, but it's asking a question about that. Should we let's go? It's a very literal way of looking at it, right? But that's why it's translated as shall we? Shall we go? So in the Genki textbook, you learn mashouka. This is the polite way of expressing this kind of shall we or shall I. But just remember that you can use this with absolutely any verb in the volitional form. Yo, iko, ikoka, tabiyo, tabioka. That's just a more casual way of talking. Now in the textbook, they explain that you can use this as kind of a suggestion for help.
あっくそこのオンボロテレビが
僕が見てみましょうか。
あ
But that's not the only way that it's used, that's just the way it's taught at the N5 level. But this mashouka or yoka is just expressing a suggestion for an action. And it can be used to suggest, for example, help. So there you have it, you've learned a lot of different ways of using the te form. You've learned how to conjugate the te form, how to make requests with te KUDASAI, how to connect two actions with the te, how to give permission with TEMO, and how to strongly prohibit something with te wa IKEMASEN. So I hope this video was helpful for you. There was a lot of really important language here with the te form. This is one of the most fundamental pieces of the Japanese language, so getting a good feel for how to use and how to conjugate the te form is very, very important for absolutely everybody. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks so much guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and come join us on the Game Gengo Discord on Patreon. Thanks so much guys. See ya.